president tonight, which would be a riveting conversation. The reality is a couple of the years we had our Wall Street Summit, Sister Toni, in January it snowed. Of course, I said we're getting beyond that zone now, and he'll ever close airports in Washington, and when Chicago closes airport-wise, it just shuts down the nation in so many ways, it seems. I'm delighted you are here, that you made it through the snow, and made it before the snow came. This is the beginning of 2 days of real serious sessions. Tomorrow morning, we're Larry Merlo from CBS, Aetna, with the dialogue with him. He can't fly out of Connecticut. So we'll have somebody here from CBS Aetna tomorrow morning. Okay. At noontime, at a minister's luncheon, Reverend Dr. Cleaver, Congressman from Kansas City, will speak tomorrow. A major session tomorrow afternoon on life beyond the playing field. We have a brother here who got a PhD from Georgia Tech, an economist who has been researching how do you build stadia. You know, we're picking cotton balls, now footballs, just picking. And then tomorrow night we have our reception, gala. Layla Hathaway is supplying the music, and I'm backing up, I'm singing with her tomorrow night.
Oh my, oh my.
Well,
all right.
Bill, why you shaking? I thought you were asleep, Bill. And Friday morning, Maxine Waters will address us. In so many ways, we've come back to Wall Street 400 years later. While much of Alabama and the Carolinas get the hit for the plantations, New York really was the harbor. The big shippers came out of here, importing Africans and exporting cotton and tobacco. So those guys funded the formation of Harvard, Princeton, Yale, all that's where the money was right here. So we returned 400 years later, not as slaves, but as 55 congresspeople, African American, 38 Latinos, 20 Asians. So much has happened against all of the odds, against all of the meanness. Somehow we've survived. We're glad about that. And Toni, we're glad you're here tonight. We want to thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Brother. Thank you. Thank you.
Toni Towns Whitley, President, U.S. Regulated Industries for Microsoft. President. You'll say President. Your journey. How'd you get here?
Combination of grace and grit. Grace of our Lord and Savior, and the grit of my parents, James Franklin McCall, from Horter Street in Germantown, Philadelphia. Went to Central High School and University of Pennsylvania, ran Penn relays, and was not allowed into the U.S. military as an officer. Came in as a non-commissioned officer 3 years later, picked up, and ended up a three-star general running and comptroller of the U.S. Army. And Yvonne Jackson McCall from Gary, Indiana, daughter of a Reverend Lester Kendall Jackson, who desegregated Miller Beaches with a bat and a Bible back in Gary, Indiana, a civil rights worker with Daddy King. And she went to Columbia Teachers College and danced at the Apollo as she got her way through her master's program. And so they created the grit, and the Lord created and continues to provide the grace. And it's that combination of public servants, military soldiers, and teachers that propelled us in two of the industries that prepare leaders probably better than any other. That was the foundation that I started with, and I still have, as they are still living and still calling me every day and reminding me that I am their best blessing, but they do share that with my brothers as well.
We know Jackson 5
from Gary.
Gary.
And we are Jacksons.
And we are Jacksons. But how did you get off into technology? Because this is relatively new, and yet you're on top of the game.
Thank you. Look, I started as an economist. I started my training, and I speak to the fact that all roads can lead to technology. That you don't necessarily start or have to start as an engineer or a computer science major. I started with economics at Princeton, started doing consulting, went and lived in Africa for 3 years as a Peace Corps volunteer. And when I came back, I saw The trend of all consulting and change in government at that time was this new thing called mainframe computers, and how computers were changing the productivity models, how they were changing collaboration. And so I decided at that point to move from consulting into technology, and I did systems integration technology, and I did specific application development, and then I started to move around the world to understand what technology meant in a global context. And I'm thankful that I've had a chance. I worked for DC Public Schools for a while and tried to rebuild their technology program under General Becton, Julius Becton, back in the day. So, Reverend, I would say I started with economics, which gave me a sense of how to model and frame questions. Technology gave me the answer to some of those questions, the means on how to implement. And about 4 years ago to the week, Microsoft came to DC looking for a head of their global public sector practice. I went to dinner at the Hay Adams, not with the intention of taking a role at all. I have 5 children and a husband, all from the DC area. We were fine. I had just been promoted to run a Canadian firm. And they came with a mission of empowering every person on the planet. And it was that mission and that message that had me leave all 5 kids, take my husband across from Washington to Seattle, Washington, and join Microsoft.
So you can't see around the corner until you get to the curve.
That's right.
And there you are.
Yeah.
But this president of U.S. regulated industries, kind of what does that mean?
Yeah. So when you think about, there are 5 fundamental industries that I serve. I serve government, whether that be federal government or state and local government. I serve education, that's K through 12, as well as all higher education. I do financial services, and that includes wealth and capital markets, but also core banking and insurance. And I do healthcare, payers, providers, pharmaceutical. The goal for this role is that I introduce Microsoft technology into each of those industries with teams that help those industries, doctors at Cleveland Clinic, if you will, financial institution leaders at JP Morgan or Wells Fargo, help them understand how technology can transform not just their IT department, but their entire organization. So that's what I do daily. Prior to that, I was doing that around the world globally.
Was it a major shift from the Canadian firm to Microsoft?
Big shift, yeah. So I was with CGI, which is a Canadian firm, smaller firm, very focused on integrating technology. Microsoft builds quite a bit of technology. So it was important for me to understand how to, from building to implementing, to be as broad as possible. Because if you're not on the design side of technology, which you can influence how technology serves communities, how it serves people in the African American community, you have to be on the producing side of technology, not just the implementation side. So that's why I made it.
In this transition, what do you find to be most challenging?
The scale and pace of technology, you all probably see it even with your phones and different ways that you look at technology. Technology is moving faster than the rule of law is changing. It's moving faster than public policy. It's moving faster than governance and regulation. So there are things that this computer that I have in front of me, this Surface device, can do, and I have to be part of the conversation that says, should we do this, not can we do this? The technology allows you to do things that perhaps, as it relates to privacy,
should not do.
As it relates to ethics, as it relates to human principles and protecting. What does it mean that over 50% of Americans have their face captured in a system in the US? What does it mean when we know that facial recognition is not a mature technology, particularly for people of color? Could that same technology that is helping us, that allows me to look at my computer without a password and have it open up, can that same technology also then be used to hurt, to discriminate, to possibly inappropriately and inaccurately name and identify individuals for the wrong things, not just the right things? And so I feel a lot of responsibility in technology, that we've introduced capability that's changing the world, but we have responsibility on how it affects humans.
Is that why there's so much sensitivity now around what's happening in Silicon Valley and in Washington, D.C., because the speed is greater than the legislators?
You know, we spend some time, if you will, trying to help the incoming Congress and incoming politicians understand technology. It's a huge gap for the government to understand. We do this all day, and it is hard to stay current when you're doing it all day. Imagine you're a policymaker, you're trying to understand how to legislate, and these technologies create new capability. Should it be regulated? What's the role of government? So this is where Silicon Valley and Washington, D.C. are starting to come together. They're starting to have conversations around cyber threats. What constitutes, we all know that it's not whether an organization will be attacked, it's when, and how will we respond? What's the critical infrastructure in our country? How protected is it? Bridges, roads, thoroughfares, hospitals, private information. And so we're spending a lot of time at Microsoft engaging with government officials.
Do we have the capacity to stop the Russia-China invasion?
That's a light question, Reverend. Thank you for that. Just sort of a ease-in kind of question. Thanks so much. Look, I think the question is, can we even qualify and quantify what that looks like? You mentioned the unknown. You mentioned being looking around the corner. Technology creates what I would call the inductive unknown. Most activities move left to right. You can see step A, B, C. Some people think reverse engineering. Start at Z and move backwards. Technology can be inductive, but you don't know exactly what's around the corner. You don't know if the capability that you put in to track medical devices could be used differently. Could it be weaponized? This is the change. And so right now, we're using technology to try to qualify and quantify the threat to this country. We're looking at threat vectors, cyber, what is critical infrastructure. So we don't believe the next battle is a physical battle.
But this
the battle is a cyber battle.
This is so different than what you were doing with the Canadian company. How did you make this radical, substantial adjustment just in terms of the knowledge base of it all?
So look, when I talk to folks about career, and I say this to my kids as well, I see career as a staircase. There's vertical moments of your career where you are stretching into new capability, having to learn an amazing amount of new content. There are horizontal moments of your career where you're applying what you've learned in a new environment. And my whole career has been around this staircase. Microsoft was a vertical step for me. The Canadian role that I had was a horizontal step. I was applying things I had learned previously. My hope is to never stay in one direction too long. You meet people that love that vertical climb, but they never apply it. So they don't make other people better. They don't make their organization better because they're personally just trying to get that IQ high. Then you have people who stay in a horizontal because they don't want to learn anything new. They become the smartest person in the room. My goal has been not to be the smartest person in the room, but to always be curious. And in doing that, the Microsoft move to me was a big vertical step, and one that I'm thankful I'm learning daily. I enjoy that environment.
In this, what is your greatest joy and pain, if there be any?
You know, I will say to you that I have seen technology transform, save lives, save human lives. The ability, a little 3-year-old named Winston who was born with half a heart, and we put a technology in at Kansas City Children's Hospital that allowed his parents to go home with actually this device and to be able to watch him breathe, and at the point of crisis, being able to talk directly to the hospital, which is why Winston, when I met him, he was 3. He had a 30% chance of making it, and Winston is now 6, and he is strong and moving fast. There is a phenomenal impact of what technology can do that makes me feel very proud, as well as very, very humbled.
That's the joy.
By that. The flip side of that is I look at my time spent overseas particularly. I look at an industry, I call it an industry, human trafficking, $32 billion industry. I spend so much time in Southeast Asia trying to understand, follow the money, because the money unfortunately is the trail that helps you find sex trafficking and human organ trafficking. This same technology that can help us solve the problem also created part of the problem, right? The internet, the explosion, So it's hard to deal with the fact, the duality, that the technology has the ability to be used for good and for evil. You can't stop your movement and your development. You can't stop progress in technology. You can't stop thinking about opportunities to do the good just because the evil exists. And I think that's a constant that people in the industry are dealing with daily.
Without having a sense of the critical training, my sense was that we've made, at some levels, a monster that the owners can't control. There was a movie to that effect, right? They made this monster, and the monster's like out there. And for example, when I hear some of the attacks on, say, Microsoft and Google and like, some of it's unfair because it's assuming somebody's schemed to hurt somebody, and the machine just got away from them. It looks like to me.
Well, look, I think the more, as you introduce new capability, voice recognition, artificial intelligence, predictive analytics, we're not always sure exactly where this technology can take humankind. I would argue that if we didn't introduce any new technology, you can use the internet to go find really inappropriate material right now. There's no innovation there. Humans will find their lowest common denominator at times and the highest common denominator. So we're not changing human behavior completely with technology. I will say that we spend a lot of time at Microsoft making sure that as we introduce technology, we have a principled approach to assessing what the implication is. Is it transparent? Are we being transparent? Do we respect the privacy? Does data belong to the person who created the data? We've made principles, and I would say one of the many reasons I enjoy working at Microsoft is you need to have principles before you hit the storm. If you're waiting to create a principled approach when the storm hits, you're way too late. We have to have principles ahead of time, and it has been a very principled path across Microsoft. Compliance, security, transparency, openness, all of that. So we acknowledge we don't know all that we're building, where it's going to go.
The government's attempt to slow down this is to regulate, oversight it. Will that work?
Look, I think in some areas, you may have heard our president and chief legal officer put a blog out, Brad Smith, several months ago, really encouraging government to be part of regulating some aspects of artificial intelligence. In fact, we want to see government play a larger role. You don't want IT individuals who are not elected officials making decisions about what data gets captured by your local police department. You may not want, just because we know how to do it doesn't mean we are the right people. We are not representatives. We have not been elected. So we do believe there's a role for government in regulating some aspects of emerging technologies. What constitutes, in fact, we've got a digital Geneva Convention that we've put forward, which is our attempt to bring countries together to agree, like the Geneva Convention set principles, what's the digital Geneva Convention that says cybercrime? Who are the victims of cybercrime? Who will we hold harmless as we go after countries that we don't hurt the citizens of that country? So our belief is that we need government as part of this conversation. But we have to educate government as to what the technology can and can't do, how mature it is, and almost I kind of like the approach of warranty. The way in an insurance conversation, here's the warranty. This is what this was built for. If you use it outside of the warranty, now let's look at the implications of that and let's think about that in terms of penalties. Because there's technology that's not being used correctly, we know that.
You're going from Windows and Internet Explorer to clouds. How does that shift work?
Yeah, we've gone from the PC world to the cloud world, mobile world, and really one would argue the next inflection will be artificial intelligence and then possibly quantum computing if we were to look left to right. You know, cloud is about having the capability to store, to analyze, to compute, and to reason over huge amounts of data. I mean, the amount of data, when I look at something like an NIH, a National Institute of Health, or I look at the work we do with University Pittsburgh Medical Center, the medical cancer studies, genomic studies that we can take so much data and reason over it real time, that we can bring data to a battlefield for a soldier who's forward deployed. He has nothing, he or she has nothing, they're in real-time battle, but now they've got data that can be integrated in the mission center, in the mission that they find themselves. That's a phenomenal capability, but it does mean that we have to secure it very, very carefully, and that's where we've been spending about $1 billion a year at Microsoft on security.
But China and Russia, others, Germany has this capacity as well. What does that mean in terms of some kind of global sense of collective agreement? Like we had to have nuclear agreements because they could destroy the world. Do there any kind of agreements relative to this use?
Yeah, so we've signed, you know, Microsoft's been part of a tech accord, which has brought together about 400 tech companies to start to speak to what will be the way we govern our cloud capability. We also are part of a cyber threat alliance for the US government that looks at all the various tech companies that come together to understand cyber. I've spent a good bit of time in China and Russia doing work globally, and all of this capability exists. Cloud capability exists, obviously with large players like Alibaba and Huawei, all of the large cloud providers. At the end of the day, it's about how much can you secure your cloud. It comes down to security. And that security is at multiple layers. It's got to be embedded in your hardware. It's got to be embedded in your software. It's got to be embedded in your environment. And then you have to train people, because where do you think the greatest risk of security exists for any system? It's us. It's humans. Passwords being shared. I mean, just think of what we do as humans. So that's part of the training. We do that. I have cyber centers around the world. I've been in Sao Paulo, in Bahia, Brazil, in Singapore, where we try to train the local teams on what is it to protect your data in the
Can
cloud.
this be stopped by a wall? Curve.
I'm not sure what can be stopped by a wall.
Nothing really.
Not a cyber wall, no.
You're doing some significant external work. $500 million to address affordable housing. Explain that dimension. That's kind of the horizontal, the breadth dimension of your work.
Yeah, so look, when I tell you why I joined, and I literally did leave, 5 kids and a Cocker Spaniel 4 years ago. I'm not sure which was the most needy of that group, but I did that for a mission, and Microsoft's mission about empowering is embedded in how we do our work. So we talk about it being sort of extra work. It's actually the work of Microsoft. So if you've been to Seattle, you see the homeless situation in Seattle is increasingly more and more of a challenge. So we made a commitment. We are headquartered in Seattle. I've lived there for 4 years. We made a $500 million commitment to grant affordable housing, because here's what happens when a big tech company moves in. Our salaries pump up the economy, which is wonderful, but it also brings up real estate prices. Affordable housing becomes constrained. People are homeless, become homeless through the system. Sometimes Seattle also has an influx of homeless individuals coming to the city. So that's the responsibility of a company, any industry, and we've got a lot of industry leaders here. If your industry is accretive to the community, but then has a disproportionate displacement on that community, you've got the responsibility to pump it back in and create that affordable housing.
That's why some of the media questions about the Amazon situation have been kind of simplistic questions. You're losing 25,000 jobs. They made $17 billion last year, paid no income tax, $269 million in refund. And unless there's some compact with the community, they're going to drop in. Gentrification's next. They create a crisis in 5 years, as opposed to the heaven will be the hell in Queens. So the idea of having some kind of community compact so everybody benefits from the growth.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think you highlight the fact that this is it's a fast-growing industry. We see as many as 90% of jobs in the US over the next 5 to 10 years needing some digital literacy, some form of digital education to support. And so there's a huge responsibility that includes not only where you put your headquarters. I mean, that's obviously important, what jobs you bring. But talk about the education system. What are you doing? And you should hold companies like Microsoft accountable, and all of our partners and competitors. Ask about what are we doing for education in that community? What are you doing in bringing digital literacy and skills to that community? What are you doing as it relates to what we call middle skills, retraining people who have jobs that are not ready for the next step in their job because it's going digital?
You know, when I grew up in South Carolina, they used to have what they call the old Mill Hills. Greenville was a textile center. And they drew from Parker High School on the Whites, but technical high school. From there to Clemson. Clemson was more known for textile training than it was for football at that time per se. So and then they had the mill housing and healthcare center. The mill became the center of a community. That's what I mean by some kind of compact. So the mill belongs to all of the workers, not just
a few. So that distributed effect of having one major employer that then creates all these other industries around it, tech can do that. Tech can have that effect. There are a lot of smaller software development companies, even if you look in the Washington, D.C. area where I'm from, the effect of Amazon HQ2 will stir that ecosystem of contractors to the federal government. The question will be, how do you create an ecosystem where the digital dividend is in fact available for all? And I think you've got to look at that from education to government to private sector. How many new startups are going to be for the African American community or for the Hispanic community? How many developers are being trained to use the new platform? How many jobs are being created for diverse communities? I think I would look at it as an ecosystem approach and a portfolio. And that's where, we've done quite a bit. Not only in Seattle, we've been in a lot of metro markets. We were just talking about Detroit, where we've got a phenomenal new office there. We've also done a lot in rural America. To be fair, the rural broadband initiative that we did was all about connectivity across the U.S. rural states, because we have connectivity problems in the U.S. that can resemble parts of the third world. We act as if that doesn't happen in the U.S.
See, I mean, where the government can fit in at some level is that if you have $150,000 a year jobs, which we can make about $62,000. Unless there's some process of integrating them into that system, it'd just be a point of resistance and ugliness.
Yeah, that's where I would argue the middle skills, what we call middle skills, which is how do you take the $60,000 a year job and get the skill base to be competitive for the six-figure job? How do you funnel new capabilities? For example, the top competencies that I'm looking for at Microsoft and all of my competitors, whether it's Amazon or Google or Facebook, they're all looking for some of the same skill sets. Data science. You say, well, gosh, data science, that's kind of a new skill set in school. How would people who've been working for a number of years learn data science? That's why we're starting to create training directly for existing employees. How do you get certified in data science when you have a job already? How do you get certified as a programmer or as a coder? How do you get certified to understand security? And some of these sound like really tough transitions, but they aren't. We have people who do analysis all the time. They're just not doing the same type of analysis that's needed for this new market. So we are instituting training for what we call existing employees, people 25 to 65 that have jobs. That's the largest population that we need to start to get ready for the digital economy. And that's where my concern is that if we're only looking at K-12, if we're only looking at higher ed, you're going to miss a pretty large part of the workforce.
What's happening in India, for example, in China, that they have a surplus of H-1B trained workers. We have a deficit. What is this, something genetic in that or something political?
Well, I don't know if I would say genetic or political. I would say, look, I look at, it's a great question, thank you. I'll avoid that one. I look at, in India, where they've got a very large effort around smart cities. Their goal is to basically have 250 smart cities digital cities. They've got some supply-demand challenges. One of the interesting acquisitions that Microsoft, that people may not know, is when we bought LinkedIn. You know, it's interesting to see that LinkedIn allows us to understand the supply of jobs, of digital jobs, and the demand for those jobs and where that intersects. In India, you've got a surplus of capability, but they can't always find the right job. They can't always find and hit the demand. We started a program called Project Sangram in India, which was giving Indian young people off their mobile phones the ability to find the right job, and we're doing that in the US as well. So I think one of the things, look, China, as I spend time in Shenzhen, Shanghai, Beijing, very technically well-trained, coming through school. But here's one of the things that we know about technology and the workforce of the future. While artificial intelligence and automation will absolutely change and change the nature of work, there are certain capabilities that computers will never take over, that we don't see them taking over. We see technology as a way to augment human capability, not replace humans. But creativity, problem solving, empathy, nursing, look at some of the skills and those jobs. We don't have computers reaching human parity in those areas. There are 4 areas that computers right now have reached human parity, right? Where they've reached what humans can do. They're around comprehension. They're around visual, sight. They're seeing AI. The computer can help people see. You can use your phone. But they haven't reached in creativity and problem solving and complex. And so I do think that we need to look at making sure that we aren't trying to mimic the computer. The computer has reached human capability in a number of fields, but the human ingenuity that exists in this country and in our community, that is not going to be replaced by artificial intelligence.
It seems to me that we got very involved in Silicon Valley, more deeply involved. We've always been told that the old guys may be racist, their children will be better. Silicon Valley is more discrimination than the old industries. There's 186 white men, 36 white women, 3 blacks. Now it's about 25 blacks, but it's because of pressure. Do they see the value? Do those in charge see the value? And like you have a chairman of your board is African American, John Thompson.
Yes.
Why others don't see the value of that?
We're African Americans and Latinos, Hispanics are still deeply underrepresented in tech companies, right? Deeply underrepresented, single-digit representation. And there are lots of efforts that I could speak to about trying to change that. But the first piece of respect is also just physically being there, showing up in number, and sort of being able to command that respect. And we aren't. We're not represented. And I think, look, John and others know that. We are working hard to change that. But I look at the sourcing of that. If you look at comp sci programs and STEM programs, we're also underrepresented in many of those. So that's the funnel. So there's the first issue is representation. The second is of inclusion.
Does the government have a role in helping that preparation?
Absolutely. Comp sci as a required capability coming out of high school, something we've been pushing for years. Let's get everybody trained in computer science. Make it a required course. Make it required capability. It doesn't mean everybody has to be a computer engineer. It simply means there is no industry you're going to work in that doesn't require digital skills. So why not have it as a required? And that should be for every school, not private school, public school, all up. That also means you have to have teachers that are trained. We do something, sort of a Microsoft Academy, where we train teachers on how to teach with the new technology. They've got to feel comfortable teaching students. I have been a teacher. I'm a certified teacher, and I'm the 7th generation teacher in my own family. My mom was an elementary school principal. If I could have taught with the technology, real time, taught middle school, I'm teaching Shakespeare to 7th graders. You know how exciting Shakespeare is for 7th grade boys? Let me just tell you, that's like another war zone. So I'm saying if I could have been able to use the technology to assess who's reading behind the reading curve or the average, how to intervene with middle schoolers who never raise their hand because that's not cool. There are so many things tech can do now, but we need teachers that feel comfortable with tech. We need parents that are comfortable assessing and supporting at home. And actually what I'm most proud of at Microsoft is that we are spending time with school administrators, because you won't invest the money in this capability if you don't see the value. A lot of times we go right at teachers. We need school administrators to make investments. So we have Microsoft Innovation Academy, which is all about getting teachers certified. That's something that we would love to see the government also, on their end, make it part of teacher cert. I was certified 100 years ago, so I have no idea what the competency is for teachers coming out right now, but I would bet you that our teachers are not being required to come out certified to teach for the digital economy that their students will be.
You know, 100 largest cities, the majority Black and brown. That's our future. And they represent not a problem, they represent market, money, talent, location, and growth. What about Microsoft's culture that reaches out, that community in ways that other companies are not?
Yeah. So look, we reach out in a lot of different ways, but let me kind of connect the dots a bit. You know, I really do kind of see it from classroom to boardroom, because I see it as a continuum. At the, you know, the other major acquisition of Microsoft was Minecraft, and some of you who have children or young children, you know about Minecraft. It has probably the largest market share in the world. Children love it. We spend a lot of time making sure children, through Black Girls Code, Code.org, DigiGirls, ways to engage and create an environment where children feel comfortable with technology. They feel comfortable coding. That's not a guy thing or a little boy thing. They feel comfortable gaming, and they feel comfortable no matter what background they come from, that they can make it. So there's a lot of investment on this sort of K-12 getting that sense of environment for technology. We also do quite a bit once you're in the workforce. And so we have TEALS, which is a program where Microsoft goes to communities and just starts to teach and help people understand technology. We have a number of programs where we try to work with teachers, but we also try to work, you know, we have one called Coal Miners to Coders, which is in Pennsylvania. How do you take coal miners and teach them coding? You say, okay, well, why would you need to know that? Because precision mining is a capability that is coming. The ability to use data and analytics to know exactly where to mine is the new capability, and so it is important to understand technology in every industry. So there's a lot of outreach, Reverend Jackson, but to be fair to your question, all the way through, we have to carry that in a continuum. People have to see that what they've learned can be applied, they can get a job in that area, the job allows them to grow their career, and if they want to start their own company, there's capital for that, and oh, by the way, they see themselves in a boardroom. You've got to see it all the way. I spend time with a group called the Athena Alliance. The Athena Alliance is a tech-based group getting women on boards. It is a no-nonsense group with a tech platform that is focused on getting your board package, getting with editors, getting you trained through National Association of Corporate Directors, and getting more women, and from my perspective, and where I'm pushing women of color, on boards. This is about going end to end. And you know, I'm pleased to say that I just joined the board for PNC Bank. And I love to see more and more people on both ends of the continuum. But this is where technology can change the optics as well as the opportunity.
Well, you mentioned those 4 areas that Microsoft has conquered, but the human spirit. For example, I think that some of Bill Gates and his wife's venture into Africa and trying to resolve the AIDS crisis, that the humanness affects the culture of the machine. So the machine is really working for them. They use machines to help them solve problems as opposed to the other way around.
The technology becomes a means to an end, not the end itself. As cool as tech is, it fundamentally is only cool if it's driving an impact, and that's what Bill and Melinda, I believe, in the Gates Foundation have tried to do. I would say my current CEO, Satya Nadella, the #1 goal he's pushing for his leadership team is an interesting goal. I don't think I've heard it in any of corporate America yet. He's got one behavioral trait that he's asking us to focus on and build mastery, and that's empathy. He's the only CEO I hear talking about empathy in terms of, I want you to build mastery on what it is to adopt new technology, to understand where somebody is starting, carry them through the journey, not do it in a know-it-all way, learn while you're going, understand your conscious and unconscious bias. We're all required to do unconscious bias training. But even that is his ability and his push for us to say that technology is about empathy. That's the leadership trait that he's looking for. It's changing our culture.
Race is not a problem, many races. Racism,
Yes.
belief that one is superior to the other.
Yeah.
And legislate that and make it into law. Since racism is unscientific, bad, learned behavior is bad. And like, you tackle something as basic as trying to deracialize people's consciousness.
You know, what's interesting, what I find interesting about technology, what technology can do, it has connected many people. When I get on a Skype classroom and I'm on a classroom with Brescia School in Johannesburg, and I can get on my computer in the morning and talk to 40 students in Johannesburg and speak to Precious Montesepe and her efforts with her husband in changing the townships of Johannesburg. There's an opportunity that the technology allows me to connect. Now, does the connection itself change racist behaviors? Not necessarily. Humans, we've got some things that are deeply embedded, and whether we feel it on the inferior or the superiority side of it, it's deeply embedded. But just the ability to change your mental mindset that you can engage with people around the world, so that when I'm talking to people in Singapore or Taiwan or Cambodia or, if you will, Pretoria, when I'm having that engagement, they're seeing me and they're saying, that's Microsoft? Now, you know that surprised them the first time I showed up on the screen. I can tell you that first screen trip, they were like, I'm sorry, what was our meeting? I said, it's Microsoft. When my team shows up, and a lot of my team that looks like me, when women show up, it does change this conversation about who we are as a people when the technology allows us to connect. And when I can get on a voice activated that allows me to speak in the language or understand the language if I have a language barrier. These are all the things that could break down some of the barriers that exist.
Well, I got up to Greenville, South Carolina as a freshman, as a senior in high school, and I couldn't apply to Clemson. But the next year, the help of marshals, federal marshals, Harvey Gantt got into Clemson, became an architect engineer. Same year, Arthur and Lucy got into the University of Alabama. And now those two schools, Clemson and Alabama, on the biggest stage in California, because blacks and whites they've unlearned some bad lessons. They've learned some lessons of how to win, so that within the context of that football game, I say it because I think it's a little taste of heaven, and it's kind of like the kingdom of God. I was watching the NBA game this past Sunday, and no church is as integrated as the big ball game. No religious order, because they have found something, some object, where there's a sense of justice. And the reason why it's just, as we often say, because the playing field is even. You can't get any points based on privilege. Rules public, goals clear, referees fair, and the score is transparent. Those are values. If blacks had to run 12 yards because they were born out of wedlock, and the whites had to run 8 yards because they had inherited some yards because of the way they were born, family, that wouldn't work either. But the sense of justice, you know, we did not know how good baseball could be until everybody could play. We know how good tech can be until everybody can play. So will they tackle something as basic as racial exclusion because it limits the marketplace?
Absolutely. Look, we've got to democratize. Microsoft was built under the idea of everyone having a PC. That was the first way you encountered Microsoft 40 plus years ago. We're still looking at how do you democratize this technology so that it isn't for an elite few. When you're online and you built your online in the cloud native born business, no one knows exactly who you are. So who are they discriminating against? you have the ability in tech to, quite frankly, put a persona forward and not be locked into personas that exist. You have the ability to almost surprise people in tech. And so one of the things that I think about when I think about technology, you know, the phone, it was interesting, I was in Kenya a couple of years ago doing a conference on tech, a developers conference in Nairobi. And I went out to Ngong, to a little village, and was just going to buy a small coffee. And I'm getting my credit card out, and the 7-year-old next to me, who sees me struggling to get my credit card out, flashes her phone and buys my coffee with her phone, just wipes. Safaricom, right? She's on. Because they've got M-Pesa, they've got the system that allows the mobile phone to be basically the bank. Now I'm watching a 7-year-old. I'm over 50, barely, I know it's hard to believe, but, and I'm watching the 7-year-old run past me, like helping me. And you know, I said in Jameson, you know, I did my little Kiswahili and she did hers, and she basically bought my drink. And I'm thinking that was so natural for her. When I'm in Shanghai, natural to use the technology. It became almost a force equalizer. It didn't matter what village or what town, the tech was there and everybody could use it. That's, you know, I grew up in military, as a military family. Military is another institution that was probably one of the more integrated institutions, quite frankly, than government, military, and others. I grew up playing every sport known to man. Trust me, name a sport, I played it.
Which?
I was really good. I played bid-whist. I could beat you there too, but no, I'm not gonna. We're not gonna start. I'm not gonna start spades or bid. I'm not gonna do that because I have to respect my elders. But
I lost it. I lost the whist game when I was 6.
And haven't lost it?
It was because I was 6.
I don't think I've lost. I don't think I have. But I say that sports gives you that sense of not only equal playing field, but camaraderie. That's where I actually built some of my strongest relationships, playing basketball, playing soccer, playing football. Pretty decent tight end, quite frankly. I love it. Love the game. But I say that. Oh yeah. Thank you. But I say that to say, what we need to think about is like a race 2.0 mentality. This is the human race going into 2.0. And the digital economy is going to be the economy 2.0. So we can fight it, we can question it, we can circle around it, or we can dive in in a way where I'd love to see, you know, Black Facebook. I'd like to see Hispanic Google. I'd like to, you see what I'm saying? We have all of these capabilities. And this is an area where entrepreneurism and innovation is so deeply rewarded. And we've got some of that capability in our community so deeply.
I raised the race question not just from my own experience with racism, but it is the sickness that drives us into a civilizational crisis. The war between us and Mexico, 2/3 of our neighbors speak Spanish. English is a minority language in this hemisphere. Wars are not going to stop the hemispheric view of the hemisphere. Sun shines on both sides of the wall. So, but the fear of them taking over is driving us into that Trump zone. The same is true with, there are more Muslims in India than there are Americans and Russians combined. So I'm thinking, how do we take some of this technology to begin to unteach some bad lessons learned well in terms of our own sick psyche? In my household, there are 5 children, all different complexions. So right, but in the White household, there were 2 of a different color. You understand what I mean?
We understand what you mean. Now, look, Reverend Jackson, I believe that this, I see it with my kids and I see it with my grandkids. My grandchildren, my granddaughters particularly, will go up to our refrigerator and think that something will happen if they ran their hand on the door. right? They're not opening the door, which I tell them that's the only way you're going to get some. But they believe something's going to entertain them if they just touch it and move it. This generation is called fidgetals. They are born with a physical and digital capability. Wow. And they can blend.
Say that one more time.
Fidgetals.
Spell that.
Physical and digital together. Fidgetal, P-H-I-G-I-T-A-L. And what we deal with this generation is they're not going to see the world exactly the way we do. I grew up in the physical world with the laws of physics governing that. I learned computers later in life. But that is not the language that my grandchildren speak. And you give them any device and they are flying on that device. And I will bet you that you all have the same situation. And so the question might be, how then can we early on introduce a new value base? Because right now they fall in love with the device. It doesn't mean that they're a great collaborator. It doesn't mean that they know how to engage with each other. They know how to engage with the device. They know how to make that work. They feel power and some confidence about that. How do we turn that into a sense of self-esteem and a sense of global connectedness that changes the world? That's what the kind of question and framing that you should be pushing on us as an industry, but we're going to push back to organizations like yours, which is how do we reframe? The tech's not going anywhere, so we can put our heads in the sand. It's not going anywhere. It's going to just continue to grow. We want to be part of that economy, but we don't want to lose the essential values of human ingenuity. That if there's ever a group that knows human ingenuity, it is this organization and this group.
Well, I want to raise this kind of last question because how do we get Microsoft to unleash you on the world? We're made sick by foolishness and diversion. And some of the models doing TV work, teaching us the wrong questions, getting the wrong answers. And people who know the most have the least access, those who know the least have the most access. How do we there's some other people, like John Thompson, for example, we got people who really know. How do we use a medium like this to unleash? I mean, all of our girls and women and mothers should know you, like they know Robin Roberts or somebody, you know what I mean? How can we unleash you on the world, I mean, so to speak, with this technology?
Well, you and my mom agree. She believes that they need to unleash me.
We're the same generation.
Yeah, my mom believes I am CEO, according to my mom. So, which I love because she's a mother warrior. You know, she pushes and she's always pushed. And my dad too. Look, I thank you for the compliment, but I would say that there's probably a responsibility to be fair. I am around the world. I am spending time with our U.S. government. I am spending time with healthcare. And so there are connections that are there, but it's hard to scale as one person. It's hard to scale that. And we have to be careful to not overburden the very few leaders that we may have in this tech industry that may look like me as well, because they get connected to all things and they fall under their own weight. So we need a way to introduce tech and a digital conversation that is as interesting to our community as we are interested in sports, entertainment, and other things. We've got to be able to create an understanding that this is the future, and the people who work in this can be an asset. And I honestly don't have a great answer.
My concern is that we get most of our information from Tom Joyner and Steve Harvey and Morning Joe. You know, it's the transmitters. And they got the platform, you have the information that will sustain us, not just anesthetize us with some stuff. How do we get you into our homes and into our heads?
How do we do that?
On our own Facebook, a black Facebook, it's a MS. I mean, I got some juice. I can make a phone call.
Let's think about that. I'm not taking that lightly, and I don't take it I take it personally, deeply personally, but I also know that there are many other people other than myself who have information to share that are in the trenches of this digital economy that I believe are important. I have been working on a couple of organizational pieces that I have not launched yet to help this, but I'm feeling encouraged the more I hear that we need to do more. I want you to think of this concept of race 2.0. You will hear more about it in terms of what it means for the human race and what it means for the African American race. But I also would ask you to think about this technology piece. It's right now, look at who's testifying on the Hill. Look at the conversations on privacy and data. Look at the conversations on artificial intelligence and the public safety. Look at what's happening in our prison system and how technology is being used. Look at policing, and look at mobile and cloud and cyber. And we should be pushing for more people who look like us to be in that dialogue.
Well, I guess before I really close, give me 1 second, Bush, is that with all of this conversation around the Mueller probe and all that, is that Mr. NAACP come in the room? Yeah, Derek Johnson. Give Derek a hand. Yeah, we're trying to figure out how to transmit some information to people who need it. And it's problematic. How do we begin to deal with the mindset of people who believe in race supremacy, who not only believe it but have power to try to implement it, which is a problem. Race is not a problem, racism is a problem. And I want to thank you for delving into this with us, because we need what you have to offer. We thank you so much.
Thank you.
Toni.
Thank you so much, Mr. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness, what's this? All right now, I got wardrobe. Whoa. I am somebody, there we go. Thank you. Sure,
Yeah.
Do we have time for a couple questions?
Let's ask a couple of questions.
Okay.
A couple of questions. Now,
Yes.
question the one with the crooked thing at the back. The straight one is exclamation. This is, you understand? The question is this one. Exclamation is that one. So you get that? All right, next.
Question.
Yes, sir. I'd like to first thank you, for coming out. Do you think that Edward Snowden played a major role in giving Russia and China the overhand over our technology and the invasion of? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
My name's Thomas Patterson. I was asking, do you think that Edward Snowden played a major role in giving Russia and China the jump due to the fact of his major role of playing, building the walls for every major security division in our government? Do you think that played a major role in of us falling so far behind?
I would not say that I think that was there's a single inflection point like the Snowden crisis or Snowden event that distanced us. We were already on a path of moving, if you will, slower. In fact, if anything, Snowden gave us a wake-up call to how to handle data, the security aspects, personnel security, logical security of a computer system, and how much damage one individual can do. That really gave us a wake-up call. In some ways, had that not happened, I would argue we might even be further behind as a result of not putting in the appropriate security systems in place. But no, I think this is also about trajectory. And we live in a democracy, and I will say that is how we view privacy is a very American definition of data privacy. The European, if you've seen the general data protection regulation that's come from Europe, from the European Union, is all about really protecting citizen privacy. The ability to be audited, to be able to know exactly where your data is, the ability to be forgotten. That's what the European Union was providing citizens of that group that came into the U.S. and we all had to.
But you mentioned that these technical zones that has been conquered. But WikiLeaks was led by TrickyLeaks. In other words, North Carolina A&T, where I went to school, used to be in one congressional district. It's now they chopped up into use dormitories in one district. This is just tricky. We went to a school with 7,000 students and teachers, and they move the precinct 3 miles down the road. They just the trickiness of that, the rot of the moral ethical code is a piece of that too, right?
Absolutely. Look, human behavior, technology is a means to an end. Humans are still in this equation, and humans who have bad intent, malintent, poor ethics, no morals, are racist, humans are still, so when humans deal with technology, don't be surprised if you see outcomes through technology that look like human values, because that is what the technology will represent. Yeah. Oh,
Two more, and that's 3 more, and that's it. 1, 2, 3.
May I?
1, 2, 3, yes, sir.
I got some grandkids. I mean, my little grandkids. And she was eating saltine crackers.
Huh?
And I like Ritz crackers. And I was telling her, I said, Ritz crackers are much better to eat than saltine.
Speak up.
She said, Grandpa, you eat Ritz crackers. I'm sticking with saltine. And she's 5 years old. And if you let these kids open their heads and their minds, they are thinking over what we're thinking.
Digital, huh?
Yeah.
Thinking with their minds and thinking digitally.
Just open the door a little bit, and they coming.
they're coming. They're smart.
Yes,
Thank
sir.
you.
Yes.
Quick question. Very impressed.
Hello, my name is Constantine Jean-Pierre. Brother Jackson, I love you. I always supported you ever since I was in high school. When you was running for president, you ran on a platform that black men, a lot of black men was, incarcerated. I remember that. Now, my question for you, sister, is what is Microsoft doing for not just the women, the sisters, but, we have the Holy Brotherhood as well. You have sons. You look like my mother. For real. Not
She's a
when she
supermodel.
was younger. When she was younger.
Okay. She's a supermodel. I'm
She
sure.
is,
Thank you. Thank you.
Make your point.
But the community, you have black sons and you have black daughters. What is Microsoft doing for the young men? Because the young men are in trouble as well.
Yeah. No, I think it's a great point. Look, I'll just speak to one. We're spending a lot of time on this recidivism issue for prison. We can use analytics to determine where are the highest probability for recidivism, for prison recidivism. Understood. Let me just give you the continuum, though. You asked, so I'm going to tell you that is a population that staying out and not going back into the prison system is a huge part of the conversation around African American males in this country. That is a huge part, given the percentages. The second piece is on the job piece. So we do training, all of the training that we do in terms of diversity, tech training, digital training. We've been spending a lot of time in urban areas going to schools and creating digital programs. Digital programs to start from basically 6th grade on to 12th grade has been our focus area. We've taken historically black colleges like Morehouse and Howard and others and paired up programs for mentoring so that we have a comp sci person in the historically black college that's coming with Microsoft to the schools. So we've been primarily looking at the urban centers for digital training from 6th to 12th grade, primarily on Hispanic and African American males, with Hispanic and African American males as part of the program, meaning a little bit, so they see themselves 5 years, 10 years down the path. The other piece that, quite frankly, that we've done for all males has been this conversation around data science. We created a new data science program. How do you learn data science? It's one of the most critical technologies or capabilities for every tech organization. We've never had a degree. We've never had anything that did. Now we have universities for degrees. And so we've been partnering with with some big brother organizations to get more men and black men into the data science programs to get the degrees that actually fuel their ability to get jobs in the tech industry. So we've been mostly on 6 to 12 in terms of grades, and then in college. That's where we've been focused.
1, 2.
Oh boy.
I have the mic.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry.
My name is Lisa Gonzalez Williams.
Okay, sorry.
Lisa Gonzalez Williams, South Carolina. My question is, with you saying that the younger generation is so tech savvy and whatnot, don't you feel like our kids are losing their social skills? because they're bullying through phones, they're bullying, you know what I'm saying? They're going back and forth through the phones, they're going back and forth. Like my 3-year-old granddaughter, she stays in the phone, you know?
Yeah, I have great concerns about balancing the balanced behavior that tech can't be a babysitter, tech can't become its culture on its own. Tech savvy doesn't mean that we have rounded, immersive, Renaissance children. That doesn't, it means they know, even if you look at tech capability, which we call STEM, STEM can be very narrow. We have to add arts and Renaissance and ways to put things in context. The people who go fastest and furthest in tech are those who can put technology in a context. So just because you know the device, that's actually not going to propel you through your career. So you are right. We are concerned about that. Yes.
Hi,
Yes.
I'm Craig Simmons. To your point and the Reverend's point about the media, the social and the media part.
Yes.
And Microsoft was on the cutting edge of actually participating in the media point, because most people forget that MSNBC
That's right.
was Microsoft. So do you think that Microsoft made a mistake in taking such a passive sort of stance on the media side of that investment or that opportunity, and it's about time to re-engage, to get people like you to be out there in front at the media side of the MSNBCs of the world, so we have the message and you have the connection to the social part and the technology part, because we don't hear people like you, to Reverend's point.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair question. I think just very quickly I would say that Microsoft's been on its own journey. You know, we've gone from being a software developer, right, to now starting to do cloud solutions, to now trying to impact. And it's on that impact side that you'll see us, we tend to think of our media and our being and our capabilities as helping our customers grow, not necessarily telling a Microsoft story. And so we're starting to do, you probably saw it in the NFL, the commercial that ran in the Super Bowl was a story about basically special abilities and how you could use our, if anyone saw it, that's been a series that we've been running.
Right. That's not where the battle between
But that,
Fox and MS.
you're right, it's not the, but that's where we find ourselves. In other words, we haven't stepped into that battle yet. I'll take that. I'll tell you, I think that is part of our journey, but we haven't stepped into that battle. I think that's fair. Yes, sir.
Afternoon. I'm Stephen Larkin. I'm with the NNPA, speaking of media, and I want to applaud you and applaud the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for the ESSA grant that you gave us. The gentleman asked, what is Microsoft doing? What is the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation doing? They, President Obama signed the ESSA Act back in 2015. And what we've been doing is publicizing that. So Microsoft has been doing a great job trying to help elementary and secondary educational kids learn more. And so I just want to put my hat off to you for what you guys are doing.
Thank you.
And we're very happy with that.
Thank you.
Let me say before we end this, this has been such a glorious session. Derek Johnson, Derek, he's the head of the NAACP and a good mind and a good spirit. Derek, say something. I want to hear. Because really, I think those of us who are there lead, you can't lead where you don't go and you can't teach what you don't know. Those who have platforms have some responsibility to transmit from those platforms the best of it. You can make people go forward, you can retard people. If people follow a leader who's going backwards, people go backwards too. You know, 1,000 people blind, one-eyed person is a king in a blind city. Say one-eyed person is the king in a blind city. Yeah. Derek, say something.
First of all, thank you, Rev. I just came by just to stop in. You invited me, and originally I wasn't going to be in New York, but I got snowed out of D.C., so I told them, give my flight to come to New York so I can be with you. And I'll be with you on, Friday? Friday in Seattle with the Microsoft Black Employees Resource Group. First of all, I want to thank Reverend Jackson for keeping this hope alive. You know, corporations have one primary function, particularly those who are publicly traded, to maximize profit for their shareholders. And if we're not disrupting that conversation, they ignore us as a community. And the only way they begin to invest in our community is through disruption. It is through our ability to place our values on the table so they can understand that their bottom line can and will be impacted if they disrespect our values. And the question of white supremacy is what I walked in on. The question of this Confederacy mindset as we've seen it bubble up in Virginia, we must always recognize that that whole tour of hatred and racism was based on profit. Rich white guys in the South who wanted to maintain an agricultural-based economy, and rich white guys in the North who wanted an industrial-based economy. And though that mode of production turned from a discussion to an argument to a fist fight, Canaan and Sumner's, to articles of secession, to declarations of war. It was about the money. And so what Rainbow Push is doing here, what Reverend Jackson has been doing, is to keep us focused on the mere fact that if we're not disrupting, then we will be left behind. Capitalism is not democracy. If democracy is strong, we keep capital in check. But when democracy is weak, people get exploited. So thank you, Reverend, for all that you do.
Well, thank God for the snow that made you said we're an afterthought now because you came. Friends, let us stand together first. Give Sister Toni a big hand, please. Give her a big hand. Next door, we have a reception and some food. Now, there are no chitlins.
I'm from Mississippi now.
I know that. No crackling cornbread, just a basic. You understand? Let us pray. Oh God, how we thank Thee for across these years and these miles you brought us. On these shores we landed 400 years ago, and here we are tonight teaching the world anew, making a new world. We thank you for Sister Toni and those who are there know and then teach and then share. We fall down sometime, but we get up again. Because the ground is no place for champions, and so we rise higher and higher. But let us lift as we climb. Amen.
Amen.